We're going to talk about the French and Indian War, which lasted from 1754 to 1763, and it was where the French had occupied this part of North America, all along the rivers, down into the Ohio River Valley, including what is today Pittsburgh. Now, this is a problem because down here you have the British. Now, the real difficulty here, and why it's called the French and Indian War, is because the Indians sided with the French. The American colonies were very vulnerable all along here, and the French were sending Indian war parties in here to attack them, and the British have to come along and fight to protect their colonies. For this assignment, we actually have 4 questions we want to answer. Number 1, when and why was the war fought? Number 2, who fought in the war, meaning French and Indian, don't get confused by that. 3, what treaty ended the war? And our most important, and it is our most important, we have to understand that after the war, what British actions angered the American colonists? So again, in 1754, the French had occupied this area right here. The British are getting very kind of antsy about this, so they send this young man, a lieutenant, well at this point he's a colonel, from Virginia up to Fort Pitt. Well, back then it was called Duquesne. It will eventually be called Fort Pitt, and later Pittsburgh, and then, Pittsburgh Steelers, and so on. So they send him up here, this guy, and he's just supposed to go up there and talk. He kind of accidentally kills a French officer. There's a fight breaks out, and next thing you know, this guy's having to run back to Virginia, where he gets cut off, surrounded, and has to surrender. By the way, this is George Washington. He was a young man, and he was already getting in trouble and making a name for himself. So in 1755, a year later, the British feel like it's time for payback. So they are going to send their best and brightest, an officer named Braddock, up here again. Only this time, it goes much worse. George Washington tries to warn Braddock, hey, look, it's the woods, the Indians are wild, they're really good at this fighting stuff, especially in the woods. Look out, and Braddock said, I'm not worried about it. Well, you know how that goes. What you see here, Indian warriors, and of course, what are they doing? Hiding behind trees, they're camouflaged. The British are slaughtered. It's one of the worst military defeats in history. The redcoats, the marching in order, it was really bad. And this is very disturbing for the British. So again, we have Braddock destroyed about right here, and now we've gotten into 1757. This is going to be the worst point for the British during this war. Right here, there's a little fort, and it is called Fort William Henry. And again, this will be the low point for the British during this. So the French have managed to take all this, and what you see over the next few years is the British slowly build up their forces and actually apply themselves. So they'll start coming in from New York and pushing back. In fact, the English are so successful that by 1759, they're able to take the city of Quebec. If you have a map on your worksheet, you might want to check that out. That's Quebec right there. That, of course, cuts off the French so they can't get resupply from the ocean. The British really are in control now. And then in 1760, they capture Montreal right there. So again, that was 1759 for Quebec and 1760 for Montreal. It takes them a couple of years to get everything figured out, and when they do, it is called the Treaty of Paris of 1763. Important date, because the treaty that ends the American Revolution will also be called Paris, but 1783. So 63 ends the French and Indian War. Now this is the before, see, British, not too impressive, and then this is the after. Basically, the French have lost their entire hold over North America. Even Spain had to pay a little bit because they sided with the French at the end. But there's more to it than just this. This red line right here. It's called the Proclamation Line of 1763. And let's see, we're going to take a closer look at this. So as we look at 1763, the French are now gone, which has left the Indians kind of on their own when it comes to facing the British. Now the Indians rise up in revolt again, and they kill a lot of British people, and the British are like, we really can't afford to keep fighting over there. By the way, this war has cost a lot of money, and who have they really protected? They have protected the colonists, and they're very aware of this. So they want to keep these two separated, so the British draw a line right there, and that will be called the Proclamation Line of 1763, as I said. And this is not going to make the colonists happy at all, because the way they see it, they fought for this land, they want to take the land, but the way the British see it, they really need to preserve it for the Indians. So that's the first step of why the Americans get mad at the British after the British just protected them. So this leaves with one very big question. Not only is the proclamation line a problem, but who's going to pay for all this? It was a giant war for Britain. It was a faraway war. And it was very expensive. They lost an entire army with Braddock. So who do you think is going to pay for it? Well, who did they protect? Who benefited from this war? So they said the Americans. Number one, they start by doing a sugar tax. Now this leads to, in 1765, a year after the sugar tax, 2 years after the sugar tax, the Sugar Act, Currency Act protests, meaning this is the first time you see the Americans actually kind of stand up and say, hey, we don't like what the British are doing. These are the seeds of the revolution. So to review, our first question was, when and why was the war fought? And the answer of when is 1754 set to 1763. Now why? Rivalry between English and French led to the war. French were driven out of Canada and their territories west of the Appalachians. So that's not just why, that's what happened, isn't it? So, Then our second question was, who fought in the war? It was the French and Indians against the British and American colonists. Our third question, what treaty ended the war? The Treaty of Paris, 1763. And our fourth question, and most important, after the war, what British actions angered the colonists? First one was the proclamation line of 1763 forbidding the colonists from going past the western part of the Appalachians, and they're like, hey, we earned that. The second part was these new taxes, like the Stamp Act, taxes on legal documents, but they also taxed tea and sugar. We like tea and sugar. So these were things that made the Americans very mad, even though maybe they should have been shouldering some of the payment for the British troops. Alright, so just to review, I think you have a map. Quebec, Montreal, Fort William Henry. Right here is about where Braddock was defeated, and of course the proclamation line, most important on this map, right there. So, and then there's that guy. We think he might have started this whole war. Thank you, and good night.